Multiculturalism has worked in the United States. I know there are some who like to profess that it has not, whether people like Peter Brimlow and perhaps Charles Murray. But multiculturalism has worked. And it has worked to the degree that any time new people who have formerly been locked out have been allowed to join in the American experiment, America has become a better country, socially, politically, culturally. So to say that it has not worked is factually untrue and historically incorrect. Now, there are people now who their version of it not working is that it has eliminated anyone from having cultural superiority in the sense that we can all share each other's culture and look at different viewpoints and different backgrounds. And that makes us a much better nation, that we can take all of these things and from this group and from that group and find ourselves to be to broaden our horizons, that we're just a much better people as a result. Now, to the degree that some people want to go back to cultural hegemony, if you please, then the nation will be continuously frayed at the edges. And again, people like Peter Brimlow and CPAC and all of that is actually dangerous for America, particularly in times of an economy that's tenuous in nature. But when we begin to understand that all of the groups actually have more in common with one another than they have differences amongst one another, then they'll be able to see that we can come together around various goals. One of the things I've always believed is that Dr. Martin Luther King was dangerous on a couple of fronts. One, he was a critic of capitalism. And while the right will never talk about that, they like to regurgitate the I have a dream and the content of a man's character rather than the color of his skin, both of which they violate often. Martin Luther King was a critic of capitalism. He wasn't against it in the sense that we shouldn't have it, but he believed that it simply should have a place in American society, but it should be kept in its place. The other thing that he was beginning to do is how do you begin to bring the different segments of the nation together, particularly around the issue of poverty. And when you begin to see that people of Appalachia have a lot in common with the people of South Bronx and of Watts and other nations, and when the barrios of New York and poor white communities around the nation and black communities and Asian communities and Jewish communities have a lot more in common, then you begin to figure out that there is a political threat against cultural hegemony. And so a lot of people, it is in their self-interest to keep these groups apart. This is why when the president was first elected, you began to see a racialized attack against him. Where is he from? He's really not like the rest of people in America. He's European, he's Kenyan, he's this, he's that. And it came from political leaders who were trying to create an environment that said this man, by virtue of the color of his skin, is different. And even though they tried to put up other people who looked like him, still they were trying to create this fear amongst white citizens against Barack Obama. And so, but what has to be remembered is that if we really begin to look at it, more people have more in common with each other, whether you're white, black, Latino, Asian, gay, lesbian, straight, whatever you are, than we do with a party that wants to maintain cultural hegemony. Cultural hegemony will damage this nation to a point where there is no way to bring it back together. What I see here, and this may sound partisan, and possibly it is, when I look at the Republican race right now, I see a desire for hegemony. I see a desire to foment what Peter Brimlow wants to do, and that's to implement the Southern strategy. When I look on the other side, I see a group of people who want to figure out how to struggle together and to live together. But I don't see that on the other side right now. I do think it'll happen once we get to 2016, because I believe that if the Republicans lose, it'll be the best thing that ever happened for the country, in the sense that they will go back to the drawing board and say we have to put aside all of this nativism and sexism and racism and all of this stuff. And I think 2016 you'll see a different Republican Party. What makes America great is it's freedom. It's freedom and opportunity. What has been confused is what freedom and opportunity has made possible. And we've confused that with the opportunity in of itself. So when you have candidates who try to raise capitalism as that which makes America great, they are either misinformed about history or they're trying to run a con game on the American people. Capitalism flows from the freedoms that we have as guaranteed by our founding documents. But capitalism in of itself is not what makes America great. Because you can have a capitalist system where everyone is making money and then the social fabric of the nation becomes frayed, which is what we are now in danger of experiencing. The issue of the wealth gap is not really about people not being able to make $1 million and things of that nature. People are really not jealous, as some candidates would say, about people who have more money. Look at how people flock to rock stars. Look at how they flock to basketball players. They are not jealous of them. They are not envious of them. In fact, they pay to see them. What bothers people is whether or not the rules are the same for all people. For example, recently the United States Congress passed regulations to deny itself from having insider information which they could trade on. This insider trading is what sent Martha Stewart to jail. So now you're saying that people have not had the same opportunity, and we're going to vote in a way that now denies us, after which we have reaped everything from that immoral law. And so people are looking at that. Are the rules the same for this group of people versus that group of people? Is not the wealth gap in of itself? Are the rules the same? And that is what causes angst within the working classes and the middle classes, and certainly amongst poor people. So the issue of America, what makes it great, is opportunity and freedom. Now, having said that, we should not mistaken ourselves as a nation that has always valued universal freedom. For most of its history, people have been locked out of that which creates wealth, of that which creates freedom and opportunity. Whether it's women not having to vote until 1920, or African Americans not having their rights protected, or Native Americans who did not get the vote until 1947. And so you take all of this, and say the opportunities and the freedoms that we always talk about have always had to be fought for. It is not a given that people have always had these rights, these freedoms, and these opportunities. I remember reading a column by the managing editor of Time magazine, who stated that America is the original meritocracy, that the accident of birth did not determine where one was going. Well, that's simply historically incorrect. He forgets that you had slavery. He forgets that women couldn't vote. He forgets that Asian Americans were interned, as well as Italian and German Americans. And so what we should never do is to develop this selective amnesia about America. And we cannot judge America simply based on the net worth of a person. America is much broader than that. America's greatness is based on something that's much deeper, much more profound than the size of somebody's checking account. All elections are essentially about humanity. And what I've seen thus far is a demeaning of various segments of humanity. Whether you're gay and lesbian, whether you're African American, whether you're Latino, there's been a demeaning of people. And as I said before, the economy is a huge part of it, of this election. But one has to look at how are we treated as a human being. When I look at people who will go with one particular party, even though they've been demeaned, they've been dehumanized, they've been ridiculed, and they will say, okay, I can take that because I agree with their economic positions. I'm not willing to trade in my humanity for a tax cut. And you do have to look at people who are willing to trade in their humanity for a tax cut, for a certain program. And that troubles me because I'm still, and I have to be honest about this. I don't know if Mr. Romney's a nice guy or not. I don't know about his pranks as a child, but I do look at someone who was formed through what is possibly an immoral way of looking at people of color. And while I understood their statements about how glad they were when their denomination changed those kind of rules and regulations, I'm not sure that that has gotten down all the way to the grassroots. I raise that about any denomination that would look to demean people and cast them as children of a lesser God. And so that's troubling for me. So for me, any election will ultimately be about my humanity. And what am I willing to trade my humanity for? For those who of the Christian faith, for what good does it do a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? And so I like tax cuts, I like all that stuff, but if I have to dehumanize myself in order to get them, that's not a price I'm willing to pay. And I think no matter how you see the economy, no matter how you see the nation, no matter what your ideology is, if it winds up that you must trade in your humanity for 30 pieces of silver, so to speak, that you have to wrestle with that. And I'm not sure how people wrestle with that. For me personally, I can't. I could not see myself giving away my humanity based upon economic policy. Well, my next book is When Salt Loses Its Savior and the New Pharisees, and we're taking a look at the church of today and what I believe, at least in some segments of the church, seems to be becoming more pharisaical than the church that Christ Himself wanted, which is love one another as I have loved you. And I think we have moved towards a more legalistic, at least amongst the churches who are more public today. Mainline denominations have their own issues that they have to deal with, but I think the churches who are certainly getting the most face time be dealing a lot with that, but also talking about the church in general in the United States.